Hola, mi gente, and welcome to Cuéntame con Sonia Camacho. This short form podcast features the stories of Latinos from our community, from engineers, business owners, students, and so much more. Each episode will give you a quick boost of motivation and encouragement before starting your day. I'm your host, Sonia Camacho. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to Cuéntame con Sonia Camacho. Today I have Irais. She is a amazing person. She actually reached out to me today to kind of amplify her brand and talk about the lifestyle brand that she created alongside with her sister that actually aids in supporting free mental health discussions in Chicago. And the goal of everything was to, exemplifying generational wealth and health. And I think that mental health is a huge topic that I haven't even really touched on yet for my podcast. I'm a big mental health advocate, and so I'm so excited to have you here. And with that, let's just have a casual conversation and tell us a little bit more about your journey creating a brand. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Sonia, for having me and letting me be on the podcast. So, as you already mentioned, my name is Irais Elizarraraz. I am based here in Chicago with my brand alongside my sister Ixen. And honestly, I'm glad that you brought up the mental health aspect, but we didn't start off with um, that being implemented and layered into Sin Titulo.
Mm-hmm.
So initially we started Sin Titulo in 2020, and I believe like that time frame is very important to mention because with our brand, we saw the reason why we started up our brand was because there was a lack of what we described as unapologetic designs in terms of our cultural identity, but then also social justice. So being in the presence of the pandemic and really having your thoughts to an extent amplified, and really reevaluating who you are as an individual, as a consumer, and with everything going on, I wanted an outlet to amplify my voice. And one of the things that I just kept on running into was straining my voice. I realized I was staying up late just thinking about life in general and how that was perceived living and being a Latina in society. So the shirts was an outlet for us to amplify our voices without straining them.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of being a solution-based apparel brand, which is kind of funny because it's apparel, it's something that's a necessity, but then really letting it be the fuel to what we advocate for. So we launched with that mindset, and then later on is actually where we layered in mental health. I was personally invited to a discussion on mental health, and being the businesswoman that I am, I just said yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Is this a great opportunity? Like, sure, I'll just do this," even though personally I wasn't even in therapy, and it was something that I've always wanted to um, go into, but it wasn't top of mind at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
then when I was in that discussion, it was amplified on one like um, identity crisis, especially with like my name and just how it's a very complex name and it has so many syllables, and I've always grown up with the difficulty of like having to explain my name, and I've even whitewashed my name growing up in school and professional settings. So then that was one of the topics that we really centered on in that discussion, talking about parents being first generation. How does that look? And I did all of this in a very vulnerable and public way.
Mm-hmm.
For this discussion, it was in like a theater venue. Um, and I'm so glad that I was able to do that and so publicly, because after that, like so many people came up to me and felt it in terms they saw a reflection of my story within them.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that like mental health and talking about your mental health is essentially storytelling.
Yeah.
So I was like, I could talk all day and ramble. And then in the process, I'm healing. And as a community, we have implemented these free discussions where individuals can listen, lend an ear, voice their opinion, but then also feel like they're not doing this alone. So I'm glad that I put myself out there and I agreed to that panel discussion because then today now Sin Titulo is able to do that for numerous amounts of people out here in Chicago.
That's amazing. And what like general advice would you give to let's say there's a listener out there who kind of like yourself like hadn't really gone into therapy, hadn't made that stride yet to start talking about their feelings. Like what's some advice that you can give them being on the other side now that might inspire someone to just start sharing their story and talking about their feelings?
Yeah, so I feel like finding your own outlet. So for me, sometimes I go on rants and I record myself, and I don't like viewing myself when I record sometimes,
Mhm.
but I sometimes I don't even post them. Like I just have them just to kind of see where the conversation goes. And it's kind of weird, but like have a conversation with yourself. And that's what I did back during the pandemic. I was up, like I said, late at night and just having these epiphanies of social justice and why did I feel angry, sad, happy on certain things. And then I just kind of went through a thought process of my feelings and my thoughts because I grew up having to compress those thoughts and not really having a platform for me to voice my opinion essentially to myself, to my parents, loved ones. It was all just kind of like keep to yourself, and especially that saying of like no debes de llorar, that like taunting um attitude that people have when it comes to
Mhm.
crying. So if it's writing it down and journaling, that's something that I've recently implemented. If it's going on your Instagram and doing a little rant, if any of my followers on my personal account, they know that I love to do my little rants, and it's something in real time at times where I was like, I just feel like I need to talk to an abyss, talk to a friend. If that's calling a friend and just doing a little rant, I would just encourage doing a rant in what is a comfortable environment for you, whether that's by yourself or with a loved one or with a notebook.
Yeah. I love that. And now, kind of getting back to being a Latina business owner, can you tell us some of the struggles and successes kind of along the way, just like generally that you've experienced?
Sure. That is, I feel like I've had a long storyline of being an entrepreneur. I was one of those kids that would sell candy and snacks out of my locker
I love
in
that.
high school. I was that kid. Um, so I've always had a mentality of entrepreneurship. However, like seeing myself today, I didn't think it would be in apparel mental health. Like it's so amazing to just see like the fruition of how this brand is evolved and is always evolving with myself. And I'm glad that Sin Titulo is able to, in a sense, have like its own heartbeat and be like an extension of myself. But some of the small successes I feel like are related back to like my parents. So any little milestone that we've had, my mom especially has always been there alongside us and been our biggest cheerleader. Um, one that stands out to us was one of our first events. It was a small venue. I don't even think it should have allowed like 35 people, I'll be honest. However, we had an RSVP list of over 100 people,
Wow.
and it was one of the first events after the pandemic. It was hailing outside. It was cold and there was a line. And
Wow.
for that to be our first event, I was so grateful. It was just amazing seeing all the traction, all of these RSVPs of people that we knew, people that we didn't know. People reached out to us and they were like, "Can I just photograph your event? Like, I would love to just support." So just getting all of that love was incredible. I remember I went outside with a bottle of tequila and I gave everyone shots that was waiting in line because it was so cold.
I love that.
Um, so that one being, and then my parents coming too. My parents interacting with my friends, like it was just a weird dynamic to see.
Hmm.
But I loved having everyone there. And then one that happened more recently, we are an online store. However, we had a pop up opportunity for 2 months where we had a physical location, we had a mural, we had and a grand opening. And that one we had, it was a whole thing, and we even did like a little ribbon cutting.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, Topo Chico even like sponsored us with some product, and my dad, like I grew
Wow.
up with Topo Chico, yeah, with my dad always asking me to give him one. So he was like, "Wait, Topo Chico, they gave you this for free?" And I was like,
Uh-huh.
"Yeah, dad." So I think for him in his eyes, like that was like a big accomplishment for him. He's like, "Wow, like Topo Chico like is acknowledging my daughters." Um, how does that like that kind of was like a little um achievement. I wouldn't say little, but it was an achievement in
Yeah.
his eyes because it's like, you could have like, oh, like dad, I was featured on this, I was on this podcast, and he's like, yeah, yeah, that has nothing to do with what I value. So it was awesome to
Mhm.
see a brand that he also values um take recognition in some of our accomplishments.
Well, that's awesome. And I think you shared your story is very inspiring and motivating as well. I will definitely have all of the brand and Irais's socials linked on this episode so you guys can go and connect and support, especially if you're in the Chicago area too. If there's ever another pop up, definitely check that out. This has been an amazing conversation and just opportunity to highlight you and what you work for, what you work towards. So, thank you so much for being here. Is there any last words of encouragement that you want to leave the listeners with?
Um, Definitely, I just want to give you a shout out and give you your
Thank
flowers
you.
because you're doing amazing work, Sonia. I don't necessarily remember how I ran across your page. I think it might have been TikTok.
Mhm.
Um, but honestly, just seeing the love of Latinas, Latinos coming out and supporting each other in a genuine way is, I'm all about genuine relationships. So I
Yeah.
appreciate um, all of us kind of lending a hand because I guess one of my pieces of advice is like, there is enough room for everyone
Yeah.
in bigger spaces. I have multiple examples of individuals just hating on other people's success, and it shouldn't be that way. So really trying to break that stigma and that mindset that there isn't enough room for more than one Latina or whatever example it may be, is that we all can lift up each other and it should be encouraged because just because you're eating well doesn't mean that the person behind you can't, because you we didn't do this alone. So
Right.
always just remembering that you have a tribe and acknowledging and giving people their flowers.
I love that. Well, thank you again. And I hope the listeners enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Follow the podcast on all social platforms at Cuéntame con Sonia Camacho. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Want to be featured in a future episode? Email cuéntame.sonia@gmail.com. Thank you to our equipment sponsor, Sure.